Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Hello to you. Are you a free thinker? Would you like to be a free thinker? Do you think it's good to be a free thinker? Well, we have to start with that because I am very happy to interview Dale McGowan, who is the author, along with others, of a book entitled Raising Free Thinkers, a practical guide for parenting beyond belief. Parenting Beyond Belief. What an intriguing title, Dale.
Well, thank you.
So what do you mean by that?
Parenting Beyond Belief is a reference to a previous book that was specifically written for non-religious parents. So Parenting Beyond Religious Belief. This book is a more general topic, raising free thinkers, for anyone who wants to raise children who are independent thinkers, who think without the undue influence of tradition or dogma or authority of any kind.
Yes, dogma or authority of any kind. And yet we know that parents need to be authority figures, but in a different kind of way than many people may think. Would you say?
That's exactly right. There's a concern that when people hear that what you're saying is that the parent abandons all authority. Obviously, the parent is going to have an authority relationship in the family, but what you want to do is have it a healthy relationship. You want to help your children develop a healthy relationship to authority. So when I live in the world, there are authorities, there are laws, there are the police, there are political leaders, and so on, that we have to abide by. But you want to have a healthy relationship to that authority, which means that you're able to think independently and assess when the authority is appropriate, when it's a healthy relationship, and when you need to assert independent thought. So when you have someone who has an unhealthy relationship to authority, maybe they do everything they're told. A political figure or, laws, if there's an unjust law, they won't challenge it. If they are told to do something that is immoral by an authority figure, they will do it. By raising free thinkers, we want to help bring people up in the world who will be independent thinkers who have a healthy relationship to authority, not meaning that they disregard everything they're ever told, but that they're able to be an active participant in decision-making.
Yes, active participant in decision-making. And I'm thinking about the difference between authoritarian and authoritative. Would
Absolutely.
You say yes? Okay, so not to abandon, to help people think freely on their own. And I'm imagining there are some people who are knitting their eyebrows right now and saying, uh-oh, what are we going to have, a mob here? You mentioned authoritarian and authoritative. That's a really good place to start. There was a researcher named Diana Baumrind in the 1960s. I think she started her work, continued up into the 80s, and she identified 4 different parenting styles: authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved was one that was added in the 80s. A lot of people hear authoritative, which is the one we're describing, the Raising Free Thinkers model, essentially, and they think that it means permissive. They think that there are no rules, that there's no control. The child is running the show. And that's not actually the case at all. What you have is a set of high standards in the relationship. but it's also responsive. So you will say to the child, let's talk about this so that you understand why we have a rule that you have to be in by 10 p.m. or that you have to be asleep at 9 when you're in elementary school, or whatever the rule is. The child should be able to understand why the rule exists. That doesn't mean you're abandoning the rule or leaving it open to a vote every time.
You're just explaining it. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And you are leaving it open to input. So if the child can say, you know what, I don't think I should need to go to bed at 9 o'clock. I think I should be able to stay up later. We actually had an interesting exchange with our son when he was younger. He's 23 now. Mm-hmm. But when he was about 10 years old, and it was the middle of the summer, and he thought, what is the point of going to bed at any particular time when it's summer? And we were able to have a discussion about this, and we ended up being a little bit flexible on the bedtime. We didn't say, okay, there's going to be no bedtime whatsoever, you can do whatever you want, but he made a really good case that a little later would be okay. We were still able to achieve our goals, the things that we wanted for him. He was still able to get enough sleep. Mm-hmm. And he recognized that he had a voice, that we were willing to be reasonable and be flexible to a certain extent without completely abandoning all rules. And there have been other cases when one of our kids wants something and we were able to say, I really don't think that's the way to go, and here's why. And we have the discussion, and we don't necessarily give anything on it because it's the right thing. That helps them develop a healthy relationship with authority and to be actively involved in the decision-making that affects them in their lives.
Beautiful. And you also talk about teaching ethics. Do you think, I would think that most people, if they have a institutionalized religion, that they want their children to have that religion, and they are all kinds of rituals for children. Is the idea to raise them with something and then later on have them know that they can make their own choice? Or what about people who are members of churches and synagogues and temples?
I actually have a number of friends who are actively religious and are raising their children as free thinkers. So what they do is exactly what you described. They engage in the family religion as they're growing up. Mm-hmm. They engage in the rituals and the traditions, and they know what their parents believe, and they might go to temple or go to church. All of that is entirely fine. But all along the way, they also hear a message from their parents. They know that this is what we do now as a family, but in the long run, I want you to think about this and decide where your place is and what you believe and how you want to express your sense of meaning and purpose and what you think is true in the world. That's going to be in your hands. No one can dictate that to you, and I will love you no less based on the decision that you make. You could choose a completely different religion, no religion at all, and I will love you no less. That's the message that my wife and I gave to our kids. My wife was Christian for the first 13 years of our marriage. She identified as a Christian, and we went to church together, even though I was not a believer. And both of us had this approach with our kids that we were occasionally engaging in church traditions and so on. And they went to a Lutheran preschool and so on. But they always had the message that you get to make up your own mind. You can change your mind as often as you want in your life. And I will love you no less. That has nothing to do with our relationship.
Yes, it really sounds wonderful, and it sounds like one has to be rather open-minded to encourage a child to take the spiritual risk, if you will, to create their own beliefs and see what makes sense to them. And it is a letting go, which is the major challenge of parents. Even when the children are younger, you make smaller decisions, less impactful, but to give the child an idea, practice in making choices. Do you want the yellow or the red sweater? That's something like that. And then over time, more serious choices.
Yes, and that idea of exactly right, and that idea of letting go of control bit by bit and allowing the child to take more and more control over their own lives, it can be difficult for a parent. But it's ultimately, you want them to be autonomous in the world. You want them to be somebody who walked out the door at age 18, goes to college, goes off on their own, whatever it is, and has the set of independent skills to make those decisions. And in order to do that, you don't want to be dropping the ball right at age 18. It should be a gradual process over time of trusting them to engage the world and make good choices based on the foundation that you've helped them put down over the course of their childhood.
Yes, and I think there's so many misunderstandings, Dale McGowan, and I'm just wanting everyone to know that I am interviewing Dale McGowan, who has written a book along with others called Raising Free Thinkers, a practical guide for parenting beyond belief. Beyond belief. And where can we get your book, Dale?
The books are available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and a lot of independent booksellers as well. Okay,
so it is very readily available, and on the cover is a little girl looking at a flower through a magnifying glass, and she's really, really studying this flower. It's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, I love that image. It actually brought, I didn't choose it. The publisher chose the image, but I loved it immediately because it made me think of my son. Again, when he was a little kid, there was this moment that really crystallized his approach to the world for me. We lived in Minnesota at the time, and he was at our neighborhood wading pool, and there were 30 kids splashing and playing all around the pool. And he had found a little plant that was growing out of a crack in the corner of the pool. And for 10 minutes, he was oblivious to everything that was going on around him as he studied this little plant and was just, sort of fascinated by this life springing out of the cement, that kind of a thing.
Yes.
But when I saw this cover, I just thought, oh, perfect. That's just the idea.
Oh, that's just the idea. So there's something going around now on the internet about then and now, and it's something like, then you better do this or I'll slap you. And now, do you want to do it? You don't want to do it? Oh, that's okay. That's okay, dear. Which I think is these two are so extreme, such polarities, and people seem to think it's one or the other, and I think there is a great misunderstanding around the families today who are wanting to move away from parental domination. And many people can flip. They can go from parental domination into children being the tyrants.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact is, child development research has determined that both of those ways have bad outcomes. Either an ultra-permissive parenting style or authoritarian. Both of them have negative outcomes in terms of behaviors and personality effects in the child, anxiety or lack of personal organization. There are all sorts of things that can come out of those two extremes. The research supports the authoritative style, which is that flexible. I wish they'd chosen a different word for that one.
Yes.
It's so similar to authoritarian.
It's so similar.
Yeah, but authoritative is the one that establishes clear guidelines for the family, clear sets of rules, but also has a constant conversation about the reasons for the rules and flexibility, the ability to change a rule or to change the parameters of a rule on the basis of discussion that you have. So that neither one of those extremes describes that middle, and it's the middle that child development research has shown has the best outcomes for the child in the long run.
That magic middle, as they say.
Yeah.
And yes, when I go and teach, I'm mostly a psychotherapist, but I also teach at Nassau Community College, and then I go into the corporate world and I teach managers, and I will distinguish between those two words, and people are look at me kind of clueless, but eventually one or two people will come up with something, and it's a very, very important distinction to make. The other thing is that when I teach managers how to manage and how to build teams, winning teams, cooperative teams, collaborative teams, I talk to them about people projecting all kinds of things on you because you are now an authority figure, and most adults have unfinished business with authority figures.
That's right.
Yeah. And could you, in your own words, say why you think that is?
Oh, I think it's all part of that, a failure to establish a healthy relationship with authority in childhood. Most often, if you were in any one of a number of situations, it could be a school. If you're in a school where the teachers have an authoritarian relationship, or the parents, or the church, or there are so many different institutions that a child can be subject to that build an unhealthy relationship with authority, and they will then be struggling against that internalized conflict for the rest of their lives. That's that unfinished business that you don't want to have. So that's the reason I've thought of it as a relationship. That they will always be in a situation where they have to have a relationship to authority. They're never going to be, most likely living on an island somewhere by themselves.
Right.
So you want to have the most positive, healthy relationship to authority that you can, which means that you are part of a conversation with that authority. You are part of an assessment of it because it impacts your life.
Right. And even CEOs have boards of directors.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. Now, you also talk about teaching ethics and principles, and there is also a great fear in our society among some people that, ethics is, relative and relativistic ethics. There's no right or wrong, and I believe there's a right or wrong. Do you get that sense also that many people are suspicious of the quality of ethics versus religion per se?
Oh, absolutely, yes. That's one that comes up quite a lot. The concern that, again, we're talking about an extreme, going to if you don't have religious ethics or something handed down by tradition, then you have no ethics. It's completely unmoored. And the fact is, there was really excellent research done by a team led by Larry Nucci, who at the time was at the University of Illinois. Now I think he's at Berkeley. But he did a lot of cross-cultural research on the influence of religion on the development of ethics. And what he found in these 5 different cultures that he compared was that religion, whether you are in one religion or another religion or no religion at all as a child, ends up having no net effect on your ethics, on your ethical or moral behavior. It can be a medium through which you communicate moral ideas, but the fact of being in it or out of it, or in one versus another, has no influence overall on whether a person is going to be moral or ethical. If you talk to people in these different systems, they tend to agree on what the right thing is and what the wrong thing is. These are just different ways of capturing it in amber. The religion can capture it in stories and parables and really effectively teach ethics. Or a religion could create a very toxic relationship to authority, where you learn that ethics are a matter of doing what you're told. I mean, one of the things that I have always been a little horrified by is the story of Abraham and Isaac, which is a story in which Abraham
is going to kill his child because he was told to do so by an authority figure, by God. And then God stops him at the last minute and praises him for the fact that he was going to follow through with this thing that he was ordered to do. That's an example of a story that I think we need to step away from very firmly. But then there are other stories in religion that are powerfully moral and ethical that can lead us to do great things and to care for each other. So it's not a matter, and these stories are available in history and in literature and in the news and in the stories that we tell each other. It doesn't have to be in a religious framework. And what you want to do is get people motivated to be moral. And when they are motivated to do good, that's what I always try to do with my kids. I want them to be motivated in that direction, and then they will take whatever system they're involved in, and they will use it to help other people, to be compassionate, to take care of the world.
Yes, and I believe you talk about King Solomon, don't you?
Oh, so I think I did actually at one point mention Solomon. That there are a couple of different Bible stories that I use as an example. Of course, the wonderful thing about the Solomon story is that he had no intention of actually doing it. What he was doing is actually testing the maternal response in the two women.
Yes.
And the one who was not willing to cut the child in half, of course, is going to be the mother. So,
right.
All of those are, and that's a story that I'm not religious, but I can learn from that story.
Yes.
Those are powerful teaching tools that we can use. We just have to have a relationship to those stories that allows us to pick and choose, that allows us to have a participation in the story that doesn't just accept it because it's part of a religious tradition. We're able to say, "Oh, this is a story. I don't like Abraham and Isaac. I think that's sending the wrong message. But this other story over here really helps to guide me and helps me to understand what it is to be good."
Yes, and they're even talking about that beyond our species being called Homo sapiens, that we are human narrativists. Have you heard that?
Yes, the storytelling human, right?
Yes,
that's part of what defines us. Yeah.
Right. So this is how we learn, through the narrative, through the stories. And again, they're so powerful because the principles are often so embedded. And people don't even know when they're listening to the stories and liking them that there's something there that they're learning from, and what they may be learning from, like with the story of Abraham, is not a good thing.
Right, that's right.
And what about Jonah and the whale? I know I'm just springing this on you. I'm just curious about that story.
Jonah and the whale. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the context of the story now. I know it was 3 days in the whale, or in the great fish, I guess it was. But I'm not remembering the context of Jonah.
Yes, I've always been fascinated. I'm sorry, I just sprung that on you. No,
that's fine.
I was just curious. Yes, so the idea of ethics and the sense of ethical culture. Felix Adler, over 100 years ago, coined the term ethical culture, and he was his father was a rabbi, and he was supposed to become a rabbi, and on his first sermon, he talked about God in a much different light, and people were very, very upset, and he eventually started the Ethical Culture Society, and in newer, younger societies, they call themselves ethical humanists.
Right, that's right.
And I know you quote from the St. Louis Society some principles of ethical culture, of ethics, and I can't find it right now. But I wonder, again, if you would comment on the idea of cultivating ethics versus teaching religion, per se.
Yes, it's The ethical culture movement and Unitarian Universalism are two of them that occur to me as examples of cultivating religion by a new understanding. Religion has been understood primarily in terms of beliefs for many years, in terms of and beliefs are about what you hold true, what you think is true about the world. Values are about what you think is good. And what ethical culture and Unitarian Universalism, both of them are built around sets of principles that are guiding ethical ideas for how to engage the world and how to be an ethical person. And they're really quite powerful. They talk about the first Unitarian principle is something that affirms the worth of every human being. I can't remember the exact phrasing of it, but it's basically just saying we gather around these 7 ideas, and one of the things we're gathered around is the idea that every person has worth and value.
Right.
That becomes a guiding principle that can, lead you through a lot of ethical quandaries. When you aren't sure how to address a complicated situation, you can say, well, what are these principles that I've found so meaningful? And you really touch on those. So those these are two organizations that consist mostly of people who are non-theistic, who don't have traditional religious beliefs in a God, but who consider themselves to be religious communities that are coming together to create meaning in their own lives and to engage in compassionate service to the communities around them. They are really extraordinary organizations.
Yes, and what can you give before we close? We have just a moment. Can you give one small example of how a parent could approach a child along these lines?
Well, I really think that the best thing a parent can do right from the beginning is to give the child an invitation to engage. So whenever if you set a bedtime or set a restriction at home or whatever it is, rules for being in the car, you turn to the child and say, do you have any questions about that? What do you think about that? That simple invitation for the child to have part of the dialogue is something that they begin to hear enough that they internalize it, and that's the beginning of the road to being a free thinker.
Oh, that's beautiful. Dale McGowan, author of Raising Free Thinkers, a practical guide for parenting beyond belief. Dale McGowan, would you be willing to come back and talk to us some more about free thinking and how we can all become freer thinkers?
Oh, definitely.
You're
I'd love
very,
to do that.
very, very welcome back, Dale McGowan. Thank you so much for coming on Just Relationships. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.